We can't say the future without AI. I mean, there's no way around it. 50% of workers now believe AI is going to improve their experience. When I come into the meeting room, I need a way to incorporate my AI with what's going on in the meeting. It's almost a bring your own AI type of a concept. Most of what we do in our day-to-day is going to change significantly.
Hear the latest AV trends and predictions in this episode of Crestron's Smarter Spaces podcast on your preferred podcast platform.
Any other dealers that want to sell this, I'm sure they'll be happy to make sure they are hooked up with, the Blaze folks and importing all of the beautiful speakers that they can. I won't mention the T word.
We are trying to get through the entire episode without bringing that up, so don't you dare.
Noted.
Job done. And we've got through the whole programme without once mentioning cocaine.
Oh, James, we said before we came out here we weren't going to use the C word. We were going to be the first people ever to go to Colombia and not talk that.
Sorry.
On this episode of ResiWeek, Sonance acquires Blaze Audio, getting to know, and Generac's new-ish T-Stat. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek. This is ResiWeek, episode 485, getting a yes versus no. Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv. And this week, I'm pleased to be joined by three of my good friends. First, we have Mr. Jason Knott. He's an evangelist over at D-Tools. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Then we have Mr. Alex Capecelatro. He's the founder at Josh.ai. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Always happy to be here, and we've got some fun stories today.
It's going to be a blast. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Patrick Norton. He's a content specialist at CTI. How are you, sir?
I'm full of mirth and good cheer.
Mirth. I love it. All right, gentlemen, we are going to kick this off with a story that comes to us from CE Pro. Sonance acquires Blaze Audio, the Denmark-based provider of high-performance amplification and sound reinforcement speakers. Go read through the article, especially if you've never heard of Blaze before. They are doing some very, very interesting things, specifically in the high-performance space and the loudspeaker installed market, which, again, may not be something that everyday integrators on the residential space are playing with, but you should at least be aware because, again, they're doing some very, very cool things. Jason, when you see this, when you see the moves that Sonance is doing, is this a concerted effort to expand their professional offerings, or is this kind of a we've got to have it to moment of they have to have an expanded commercial offering?
Yeah, there could be a specific product gap that they're looking at that was of most interest to them. But what I see this from a bigger picture is just Sonance pushing more into the commercial side. They already have a great, series of Pro Series speakers in that line. This gives them some amplification opportunities. Again, it kind of reinforces what we've all seen, which is that continual merging that we're seeing between the commercial and the residential integrator. I just, had looked at the D-Tools data, and there are a lot of residential integrators doing commercial projects. Not so many commercial integrators doing residential projects, but certainly in the one direction of residential. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Blaze has an authorized dealer base that might be coming with this that could be help expand Sonance even more to the commercial space. But the biggest question I have from this is I want to know what's in the water or in the pickled herring in Denmark that we have Bang & Olufsen, Steinway Lingdorf, Dolly, Blaze Audio, all these big audio companies, high-performance audio companies coming from Denmark. What's going on over there?
Well, it's one of the happiest countries in the world, and they spend 9 months a year indoor freezing.
Yeah, it's very cold. You have to enjoy that audio.
They all eat at Noma all the time, nonstop, the world's number one restaurant. So clearly that's why this is happening.
Exactly. Alex, one of the things that I found somewhat interesting is the number of amplifiers that Blaze has that are native with Dante. We keep seeing this more and more in residential, but again, it's in spurts, right? Is this a addition for Sonance just to bring in somebody who's well-versed in Dante, speaks it well, and has a large variety of products that are, again, Dante equipped?
For me, Dante is a piece of it, but I think there's a bigger picture here, which is Sonance has been on the acquisition, sort of spree for a couple of years now. They've acquired a number of different companies, and their hardware lineup, at least on the Resi side, is pretty strong. In addition to this, giving them more product and differentiation on the commercial side, I think this is maybe about software. When you think about where their products are today, there isn't a consistent software sort of way to bring it all together, make it easy, integrate well. And as a company that integrates with a lot of Sonance products, I know that they don't have a big software team relative to what they do on hardware. I'm curious if part of this play is really about getting software expertise, building drivers in-house, and kind of using the Blaze software platform as something that maybe gets loaded on all of their other lines.
I like that thought. That's very interesting. I hadn't dug that deep into their software aspect. Patrick, before we leave this story, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of their ridiculous loudspeakers.
Well, I think at this point, everybody has ridiculous loudspeakers, or what looks like ridiculous until you realize you need them for some particular situation you're in. But, I think, Alex and Jason pretty much nailed it. The Ari Super and the CEO at Sonance pretty much name checked it. Where did that line go? Where they basically called out that it's really about them having a complete solution and rounding out what they offer. In terms of ridiculous speakers, if they perform, I'm all for ridiculous. But I will also say that, one of the worst speakers I've ever heard in my life had a $400,000 price tag. And I'm still to this day trying to figure out if they'd accidentally forgotten to hook up the tweeters.
Probably. Yeah, just missed that in engineering.
These were built to go to CES at the time, I'm pretty sure. But they do some interesting stuff, with the constant beam width, and I don't know. I think Sonance is probably looking to have the amplifier and the DSP side of things completed so that, they could do that thing that people love to do, which is offer a complete solution.
A complete solution. What's the lift, Patrick, for the residential integrator who is not well versed in things such as line arrays, which they do very well with this type of thing? Is that going to leave is that going to be a major lift for Sonance to try and bring some of their dealers up to that level?
Well, I don't know. I mean, how many residential dealers? I'm mentally, on one hand, I'm like, how many residential dealers sell line arrays? And then I'm thinking of, how many backyards. I have a friend who basically does home theaters, and does not have enough fingers at this point to count the number of home theaters. He's built for people in and around Hollywood and that industry, where he started by pouring 3 feet of concrete because it's the only way they can actually deal with the 6-lane road that's near their house, right? So I can see people bringing in the line arrays, for the kids, so they have somewhere to dance in our 3.5 acre backyard. But, I think Sonance is probably looking more for the hardware side of things. And then any other dealers that want to sell this, I'm sure they'll be happy to make sure they are hooked up with, the Blaze folks and importing all of the beautiful speakers that they can. I won't mention the T word.
We are trying to get through the entire episode without bringing that up, so don't you dare.
Noted.
All right, let's change topics for a second. This comes to us from Residential Systems and a good friend of the show, Mr. Henry Clifford. Getting to know is the secret weapon you are not using. Go read through the article. As always, Henry wrote a really good piece. He was recently at a keynote event where the former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss, the author of Never Split the Difference, was giving a talk and going through the kind of the juxt of getting to know versus having conversations and negotiations with your clients, trying to get to a yes. It's a fantastic article, and I've read snippets of the book, not the whole thing, but I've listened to Chris speak quite a few times now. Fantastic speaker. If you haven't heard him, go listen to it or read the book. Alex, when you read through this, it's a fascinating kind of thought experiment. When you think about how you have to rephrase your entire script, if you will, in dealing with customers to try and get to the no versus try to get to the yes. How do you go about trying to change that focus in your communication plan if you deem it's one you want to try?
I was thinking about this when I was reading the article and actually did a little bit of research, because my first thought was, I don't ask for the no often. That's not something that many of us instinctively do. It's not something that we really think of. And so I began thinking, it's counterintuitive. It might make sense. I wonder if the data supports it. And I would be really curious to try, at scale, sending a large number of messages with a yes, form, and a large number with the no form, and seeing what the results are. So I just went on ChatGPT, I loaded the article, and I said, is there any data that supports this? And what was interesting was it came back and said, this has been covered by lots of different industries, and there's the book that Chris wrote, and there are all these different people that talk about the benefits, but there's no data, there's no research, at least nothing that, AI's wealth of knowledge would serve up to me in the 5 minutes that I did a little bit of checking. So I think it makes sense as something to try. I like that it's counterintuitive. I don't know if it works, but for those listening, if you don't, know the details, the one that stood out to me as an example that I think is just interesting to think about is, often we'll say something like, and this is an example from the article, does this work for you? You're putting a proposal together, you're proposing a time, you're trying to coordinate a next step. And the suggestion is, instead of putting it that way, to word it as, does this screw everything up? Is this a problem? And I kind of want to give that a try. I want to propose to some folks, instead of, Tuesday at 10 a.m., does this work for you? Tuesday at 10 a.m., does that screw everything? I don't know. That's not the right wording, but I do want to try it because I like the theory and the concept. I'd be curious to know if someone actually did a data-focused study, if this works at scale with most contexts, most situations.
See, and that's my issue with it. Again, I've listened to Chris speak a couple of times, and it's fascinating to think about, but I hate the concept internally of starting a conversation out in a negative context, even though that seems to be what they're going for. Patrick, when you see something like this, again, you're at a fairly large company these days, what would be involved in trying to implement a change such as, not necessarily this, but something like this as a communication policy? Is it sustainable or even effective?
Okay, so, there's part of me that takes anything I see in a column with a very large grain of salt, because, I'm with Alex, right? How do we measure this? We divide our sales team into two groups, one of them trying to seek a no and one of them trying to seek a yes. And I'm trying to imagine going to, let's say we have 100 salespeople, and we out of a hat, we pick 50 names, and we tell them we're going to have you do this approach, this getting to know. And, for an entire sales team of any size, actually, getting to know, like, I get the man's approach here. I understand what he's doing. He's social engineering. Fantastic. I love social engineering. But it's also like, you have salespeople who spent their entire lives, they just want to get a yes. And I think that, Alex said it, like, this is counterintuitive. I understand what they're approaching, but this seems more like a social engineering and a hack that you use in situations. I don't know if I'd build an entire sales team around getting to know, because I think the flawless 100% result that we could track would be absolutely no sales after implementing this policy, because we got to know 100% of the time. And that's a flip response for me, but it's also, go ahead, Alex. Sorry.
No, you just made me think. I think there are a lot of seasoned professional sales individuals that have learned how to get to a yes, and they know what they're doing. But I think there are a lot of junior sales folks that don't even know to look for a no or a yes. They're just throwing out sort of these feelers. And the takeaway that I have is, whether you're asking for a no or a yes, make an ask. I've seen people where the email is, hey, checking in. Well, checking in is not an ask. It doesn't give me something to reply to. And so at least give me a yes or a no question. Don't just check in if you're trying to get something accomplished.
Engage in a dialogue. Listen to the client. What are they trying to achieve? What is their goals? What is the solution you can provide? How do we engage in that? So, yeah.
Let me say, I don't know. I'm not a psychology major, and I don't know, but there's something strange in human psychology. I can tell you from those 25 years I spent at CE Pro that an article that is an avoidance of the negative always did better than an article that was a positive. So in other words, an article that was titled 3 mistakes to avoid in your service department will do better than an article of 3 keys for service department success. Something in human nature where you just want to avoid the mistake. But this article reminded me of one of my buddies who was a good-looking guy, and we would go out to the nightclubs, and his standard line, he would approach the most beautiful girl in the club, and he would say, "If I was to ask you to dance with me, would you say no?" And if the girl said yes, then his response was, "Well, then I won't ask you to dance with me." So he kind of saved face by reversing it and making them think about the way he asked the question. And that just reminded me of that the yes or the no answer.
And Jason, what you're reminding me of too is I initially was reading this article thinking, if you can get to a quick no, it's better than a slow, drawn out no. And it's not what the article's at all about, but you're reminding me, Jason, I would much rather train a sales team to figure out how to avoid the customers that are not worth your time and focus on the ones that are actually likely to move forward. And if you can get to a quick no and move on, that's well worth it.
Jason, let me flip this for a second. Do you think that customers, if they were to catch on to the fact that you're trying to, to use Patrick's term, socially engineer them into giving a response that's beneficial, do you think there's going to be a backlash?
First of all, I think I don't think most customers would catch on to that. It's just like using, the AI generated email stuff. Right now, we're all getting those emails. Alex knows it, and Alex has been around it enough that he can identify it. I'm now just getting to the point where I can identify, okay, this email went on my LinkedIn. They figured out, they got some of my information. But 99% of people right now will not know that that's taking place. So I would kind of reverse the premise of your question. I don't think most customers are ever going to catch on to that you're trying to manipulate the response.
All right. I like it. All right, gentlemen, let's change topics yet again. This comes to us from CE Pro. Generac's smart thermostat aims to make the most out of energy systems during outages. This is a partnership-ish or a white-labeled version of an Ecobee that is tied into their generators and their new upcoming batteries so that, again, it can make better use of your HVAC system during either a power outage or a power event, as we're starting to call them these days. Patrick, let me start with you on this. So I've got a couple of things with Generac. One being, there have been a lot of reports. Again, nothing in our channel, but I'm paying attention to the generator market a little bit right now, the last 6 months to a year. There have been a lot of reports of DOA products, et cetera, from Generac. When you see them jumping on an integration with a thermostat to try and better manage the system, et cetera, I don't wonder if that's a bridge too far. I love the concept. I'm just a little worried.
Yeah. This hits particularly close to home because we had a F3 tornado. I believe it was finally declared an F3, dropped not too far over there, way closer than I'd like, and then went right through Forest Park, which is about 3/4 of a mile that way, and then another 23 miles into Illinois, which the related winds took out one of our power lines, which led to me humping gasoline and propane for our generator for about 4.5 days. part of me it was looking at this and looking at this and looking at this and trying to figure out, if they're really like, I am mildly uncomfortable with a generator company partnering with a thermostat, not necessarily an AI thermostat, but a thermostat to quote let the homeowner quote get away with smaller generators or storage systems thanks to the more efficient use of energy for heating, unquote, right? So it's like there is so much going on with maintaining energy flow into a house, and absolutely massive energy, heating in the winter, cooling in the summer. It's like I don't know that I kind of get where this just seems like a solutions desperately searching for a market, and I don't know if maybe I just, I've got family who've lived in hurricane country for 20 odd years. I've got friends who live up above 9,000 feet west of you, Alex, where power gets a little questionable, especially during like February, March. And I look at this and I'm like, I'm just not sure how this is going to work the way they want it to work. And undersizing a generator just seems like a bad idea to me.
It's a very interesting concept to try it. Again, I understand it in incredibly large environments where you have multiple air handlers and yada, 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 to be able to load shed and do all those things that you normally do with a generator. I'm with you. I'm trying to understand the purpose of this beyond just, hey, there's power down, so we're going to jack the T-stat to 78 because we don't need to cool the house to 72, even though that is a comfortable temperature for most people.
I think it's just a product bundle play. I think it's Generac. This Generac looking, okay, we have a system that ends up getting controlled by something else. Let's see if we can, add a product line that now, that gets us a bundled sale with our generator. I have a Generac up in New Hampshire at our rental house, and it does a test every day for like a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
If we have people in the Airbnb, they always call, hey, the generator turned on, or they email or text, and it's like, okay, if
we know,
that would be cool if I knew it was turning on and then I could just say, oh, that's what it is, versus is the power out? I have to always ask that question. Was there a flicker or anything like that? Because there are thunderstorms and that kind of stuff that take place. But I don't know, from a bigger opportunity, if integrators, we know integrators are looking at power as a potential growth category. We see these, UPS systems and battery storage, clean power conversations. Maybe this is just another way for Generac to see them trying to get their foot in the door with this channel through the thermostat.
Part of it's also funny because I just clicked on a couple links I didn't click on before. One, Generac Holdings acquired Ecobee in a transaction valued up to $770 million USD, right? So Generac owns Ecobee. They integrated into their energy management system in 2023. So I guess, it's funny. It's like, okay, your thermostat is smart enough to know that the power has gone down and you're running on generators, so it's going to go into some sort of like, it's either going to lower the temperature or pause, do sort of a starting and stopping thing. I don't know if Generac's the right one to be doing this, but they've certainly grabbed onto it as their future. And as somebody who's dealt with a fair number of power outages due to extreme weather in the last few years, I get where they're going.
Yeah. It's very, and again, I'm not trying to be negative on the company or the product or the application. It just seems very simplistic and something that normally would already happen with any smart T-stat. Alex, the other thing that is kind of buried in this one is the fact that they have a new battery storage solution that's coming out next month. It's supposed to be launching. This is a big kind of departure almost for Generac, who has lived in that bifuel, tri-fuel generator game for years as kind of the name everyone knows, to going after that on-wall battery application. Is that showing a response to the market, or is that trying to show some evolution in their approach and their, I don't want to say their marketing, but their use case?
I think there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm going to ramble for just a couple minutes. But in short, the big missing thing in this article is Generac owns ecobee. You don't make that acquisition without trying to think about, how do I strategically align my products? How do I get more value? How do I expand my business? And to your question, to me, it's like Tesla getting into the solar business and then getting into the battery business, in-home batteries. It makes sense that they want to take the IP and the technology they have and leverage it to grow the market, increase the number of customers, sell more products to those customers. And all of that is fine as a business. What really worries me, though, from kind of this product announcement perspective, is I was looking at this article for a while, trying to figure out, why are they saying they're launching a thermostat and it just looks like an ecobee? Like, what is this? And so once again, I used my favorite AI friend to just read the article and tell me what is different about this from a regular ecobee thermostat. And it summarized it very quickly for me, which, I've become just a crutch to AI. And what's interesting to me is the main difference is the integration, the idea that this is going to integrate directly with your Generac product. And my first thought of that is, as someone who owns a controls business, we get asked to integrate hardware every day. And I always say no, because when you start integrating hardware, you reduce the number of options, you reduce the way that people can actually build systems. And I'm a big fan of make software the way that you interoperate and integrate systems, and have the hardware be agnostic. If they had said Generac is launching some type of a module that can connect to thermostats, ecobee is the initial integration, it's coming, equipped with the software, any ecobee thermostat you buy can get a software update and do this, to me, that would be more forward thinking. Every time I see someone saying, let's build our lighting modules into Josh, or let's build our thermostats in, or whatever it happens to be, I think about, you're antiquating the product right away, you're reducing options, you're making this a lot more painful for the homeowner and the installer. And my general feeling is this only makes sense because Generac bought ecobee. And that was not clearly part of the story. I think Jason's right. I think it's just a play of a business trying to grab a little bit more market share, which is totally fair.
Now, they do have, to my knowledge, they do have some integration options. It is limited on their traditional generator line. But again, you're right. It's a very interesting, I don't understand what they're doing.
Well, think about it back in the Apple Microsoft wars. Yeah. There was a period that you couldn't have Apple software on a Windows machine and Microsoft software on an Apple machine. And finally, Apple was hurting and they gave in and they said, we're going to let, Word and Excel run on Apple. And ultimately that changed the game from hardware to a software focused approach, being a little bit more agnostic. I came into this industry thinking that we had already gotten past that, that crunch, that we're software focused, that we're integrating, and that we're trying to make these systems more interoperable. You've got Matter and all these things going on. This is a step backwards. This is a step towards saying we don't care about being relevant 5 years from now. We just want to sell more shit today.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Because it goes through their dealer network. I found like the original press release, and it's like the ecobee by Generac smart thermometer enhanced with home energy management. And it's like there's something, speaking of, getting to the first no in the sales process, but I have some friends who have significant amounts of money invested in home automation because they want the Jetsons, they want the bleeding edge house, and two of them are on like their fourth iteration of proprietary systems that have been abandoned or failed for other reasons or not supported, like Matter. Like, I love the idea of Alex or Alex, I love the idea of matter, but it's one of those things where it's like the idea is so beautiful and the execution has been such a hot mess for so many people. But it's like, and no, I'm sorry. I want desperately for it to work for a lot of really selfish reasons, not just for me, but for anybody else dealing with this stuff. But I feel like we see that thing where like companies are like, okay, we're going to open everything up. And then other companies are like, no, we're not. And, given the brand recognition for somebody like Generac, they can probably get away with it. And it's just a little upsell or something that's gives them a little more oomph when they're doing the sales pitch. Especially with the really big generators on the really big houses.
Yeah. I will say our approach building a smart home ecosystem business has always been, if you think about 5 years from now, what you might want to change in your home, we don't want people to be locked in. You should be able to change your thermostat, change your lighting control, change your speakers, change, your locks, whatever the product is, and everything else should be able to keep running. And this is, again, a step away from that. It's a step towards saying, oh, if the Ecobee thermostat you picked 5 years ago doesn't do whatever we want it to do in the future, is your generator going to stop working? Like, it just, to me, like, that is not what I think our industry is needing.
And I'll leave it here, but this is par for the course recently with Generac from what I've been hearing and what I've been seeing. They're dealing with some issues. Jason, sorry, did you have something? All right, gentlemen, we will leave it there. Thank you all for joining us. Patrick, if people want to connect with you, learn more about CTI, where can they do that?
Well, if they want to learn about CTI, they should go to cti.com. And if they want to learn more about me, at Patrick Norton or Patrick Norton on Blue Sky.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Alex, if people want to connect with you, learn more about everything Josh.ai is doing, where can they find that info?
Man, I'm so old. I feel like Blue Sky, Patrick, you just set up me. I tried getting into that. It just never happened. But, Josh.ai is the website. All our socials are there. Hit us up. But, man, Blue Sky, I'm like, I never got into Twitter, certainly not into X, and I'm worried that Blue Sky is another thing that I don't see happening for me, but I'm glad that you're doing it.
Well, having got at one point, to put this into context, I got involved very early on in Twitter because a friend of mine had a huge Twitter following, and because I didn't get into, say, Instagram on an early phase, I have zero following because it's impossible to build now. So Blue Sky has been an interesting experiment for me.
I bet. All right, Jason, thank you for joining us. If people want to connect with you, learn more about D-Tools, where can they find that info?
They can go to the D-Tools website, which is d-tools.com. And please come by our booth at Infocom, booth 3521, in a couple of weeks.
Excellent. Thank you again for joining us. If you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at Matt D. Scott on most of the socials. But more importantly, please visit AVNation.tv, where you'll find this show as well as a wide variety of other shows with all the verticals that we cover. When you visit the website, please take a moment to check out our supporters. We are extremely thankful for their support and ask that you support them as well. Thanks again for watching. That's all the time we have for this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is Erin Marmoran of EdTech. The world of higher ed AV is growing rapidly. That's why each month we hear from the best and brightest from colleges and universities all over the U.S. Check out EdTech on avnation.tv or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.